morning. We have a special guest this morning. Bruce Walcroft has over 11 years of experience in the pre-sales world, and he's currently heading up the Better Works EMEA team. So we are super excited and grateful to have you, Bruce. Could you please offer us a little introduction about yourself, about what you love about pre-sales?
Sure, absolutely. So I've been working in the pre-sales space, as you say, for the last sort of 11 or so years. And when I started my working life, I thought I was going to be an actor. I sort of studied music and theatre, and that was very much my planned route. And then I realised that people that did that generally didn't make any money, and that was a little bit tough. So I struggled a while trying to find a job. I kind of fell into some IT related areas of work, and then I suddenly came across this world of sales where you were required to still do kind of technical things. You were required to use your brain, but at the same time, you had that ability to present and kind of use a bit of creativity. And I just hadn't seen any other job anywhere that offered that combination of two things, and also the flexibility of constantly meeting new people and being able to sort of change the job every day. So that's what really excited me about pre-sales, and that's why I've stayed in the world so long and continue to love my job.
That's such a good introduction, Bruce. Thanks so much. It's interesting the point around having been an actor and a performer because there seems to be it's a generalization, obviously, but there's like correlations on the sales side with people from a sporting background or from like a military background in terms of like resilience and discipline. And it seems to come up time and time again. And this is a bit anecdotal, but it seems to come up time and time again with acting, music, kind of performance in that respect, and also teaching as well seems to be another one. So that's really,
Sure.
really, really interesting. And so in terms of hiring, so when you've been in a situation in the past where you've had to hire, how important has it been for you, in the list of different priorities that you've had as a manager?
Yeah, I mean, hiring the right staff for me is one of the top priorities to get right. I think that in the past, I think everybody's made slightly incorrect hiring decisions, and then they've realized how painful that is and how difficult that is to rectify. So I think for me, when you're hiring, spending the time to get it right, making sure that you've really worked out what it is that you're looking for, and also trusting your gut. I think that's something I've learned is that whilst paper and your thoughts are very good, there is always that, or at the moment, there is that very much indefinable bit of magic that you sometimes get with somebody that makes you realize that they're going to be very good at the job. What you're doing now, I assume, is you're trying to define that indefinable. So I'm very much for that. If you can work out what that magic is, then it'd be great to be sort of searching for that more.
Yeah. So our intuition, ironically, our intuition is that the intuition definitely should play a part, an important part in the selection process. That gut feel is there. It's like a kind of an algorithm in the back of your head, that's based on something, but at the same time, it has real inherent dangers around bias and around. So the idea is what we're aiming towards is kind of like an informed intuition. So it's lots of data points that will test your intuition, and for you to then dig in deeper if needed, and hopefully after that improve the consistency in terms of quality of hire and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay. So in terms of, if you were to look over, so when you're in a situation where you're hiring for pre-sales, if you were to look over the different components of the position, so either the components of the pre-sales cycle, or things like working effectively with account executives and so on, which are the most important ones to you to get right in terms of that person's ability?
Yeah. Okay. I try to put a bit of thought around this. For me, that the priority for me in hiring somebody, I think the key thing I look for, which is that spark. It's actually, I think, adaptability. I think that's the biggest key thing when you're in a pre-sales role. You have a plan. The plan never goes the way that you think it will, and the amount of people that I've seen fail because they've stuck to a plan and cannot shift in the moment. So really that improvisational, adaptable skill, I think, is one of the key ones to get, and also one of the hardest ones to actually evaluate in an interview, because you're trying to work out whether they are doing that. So yeah, that's probably my top. The willingness to work with an AE, I think there's a very strange mix in the pre-sales world. You've got to be somebody who's a good partner to an AE, but you've also got to be somebody who will hold them to account. You can't be somebody that just takes their word and runs with it. So it's a weird mix. You want somebody who is in some ways, I don't want to use the word submissive, but in some way is going to do what the AE is wanting them to do to win the sale. It's their sale, but at the same time to find the correct way to challenge them, to give them feedback, to help them to shape the sale in the way that works best. So that is, I think that's another really important part of the role. And then the third one is around the discovery. I think having somebody who is always questioning and always enjoys the process of digging in to find out more about something. I think it's very easy to make assumptions in pre-sales role and just assume straight away that you know the answers to whatever the problem is, particularly when you've been doing a role for a while. So when you find somebody who just hears a single statement made by a prospect and immediately then goes, oh, hang on, you've said that, so can you tell me a bit more? Can you almost that is just inquisitive and wants to find out as much as they can. Those are probably my three top skills that I would look for when I'm hiring, I'd say.
It sounds amazing, Bruce. And so you told us about adaptability. This would be the first one. Then to be able to have that critical thinking with the AEs, and at the same time to be able to really listen to the customer. And is there any way through which you assess these qualities during the hiring process? Like, do you have some discovery session during the interviews?
Yeah, so I will try. I mean, at different stages of the interviews, I'll bring different parts into play. So I'll always try to get a demo done as part of the interview process, where they can demo anything. Doesn't matter what it is. It can be their existing tool. It can be, I don't mind if people have demoed Word to me in the past. As long as you can see them sort of going through that process. And as part of that process on the adaptability, I will throw in an intentional big curveball that will not be being pre-prepared in any way, shape, or form, just to see how they handle that. And I think you get a feel on generally on when you're questioning somebody around their ability to work with others. Again, the sense of whether or not they're going to be a good fit to the team that you've built up, with the salespeople that you're working with. You kind of tend to pick up just with the way that they respond, particularly if you start asking again slightly more challenging questions. I think you want to.
Could you think about the question, a challenging one that wouldn't make a person uncomfortable?
Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking about their career history, for example, dig into why they've moved at certain times, because the people don't like discussing that. So you sort of you dig into things that you know are not necessarily the happy things that they want to talk about, or the positive things, or you dig into the old stock question around, tell me a time where you've had a really challenging meeting that hasn't worked out well, that you've lost a sale. Although almost you want to go slightly to the negative, I find, just to see how they deal a bit more under pressure in that kind of way, and see how they respond. Because I know from team members that the key thing for me is that they're willing to accept feedback. And often when you go into the negative, you can find out, and then you can ask them questions about, did you think about doing this? And then you can see how they respond to your suggestioning around that approach. I find that is often a good way of seeing whether they're going to be a good partner to AEs and sales folks.
That's fantastic. You've clearly given this lots of thought, and it's really interesting your point around asking hard questions. So I work with a company, a very well-known company, that have, as a part of the interview process, I think it was an hour and a half or a 2-hour interview, and it's separate to the traditional interviews. And in that one, they go through from university to where you are now, at every stage, really digging into, okay, you went to this university, you studied this. Why did you study this? What were your plans? What did you learn? What did you get wrong? What went well? And then you started your career and so on and so forth. And they're wanting to look at judgment, but they're also like the humility and willingness to find learnings from, you know, the inevitable times when things don't work and so on. And they really rated that as a part of the interview process. I think it was quite exhausting for candidates, but even the candidates saw the value as well. And it sounds like a similar kind of mentality. So okay, so one of the things, and following on from your point before around discovery being important, one of the things we found out from the survey so far is that the three most important things for hiring managers are working effectively with account executives, demos, and discovery. Okay, in terms of the activities within the role. Demos, there's a huge percentage of demos included as a specific part of the interview process, whereas discovery isn't. So what are your, is that just a massive gap, or is there a reason for that? What are your thoughts in that respect? Because they're very different skills.
Yeah. I think potentially because discovery is tending to be like a verbal discussion with somebody, I think a lot of people feel that they can get a feel for discovery from having the normal interview conversation. I will look to see how much they dig into my kind of questions to them. So quite often, if you say, tell me about so and so, if somebody then goes, well, would you mind defining me what you mean by this? Then immediately I'm thinking, okay, this person is good at discovery. This person knows how to ask a question to try and dig deeper. So I think maybe that's why people potentially might feel like they get enough from the interview to be able to make that judgment call. And also the demo itself, often we in the world of pre-sales have that concept of the bad concept of a demo discovery, where you're trying to do both at the same time. So I think you can still get a feel of that when you're doing the demo scenario, and still see if they've got a way of digging in, particularly when they're demoing to a product that they're not so sure on, or if where they don't know all the answers, where they have to kind of use questioning as a way of kind of finding out a bit more maybe about who you're pretending to be as a client. So that's just a guess, but potentially right.
Okay, good, thank you.
And if we're thinking about hiring, are there any specific techniques or questions that are your favorites and you go back time and time again?
I don't think that I would say I have a favorite at all. I tend to, I guess, like I was saying for the role, I tend to be quite adaptable. I almost feel like if I pre-prepare the interview too much, that I'm not going to move the way that it feels that it necessarily would need to move. So, I mean, I have a lot of very similar kind of standard warm-up questions that I'll tend to use just to break the ice. But beyond that, I hope my own discovery is that when they respond a certain way to a question, then I immediately go, okay, that was really interesting. Let's dig in that way. Let's find out a bit more about that, because that's where I think we can find out who you really are. So yeah, maybe I'm just lazy. Maybe I just can't be bothered to build a set of questions. But no, for me, it feels just very natural to ask questions as it goes through.
Yeah, and I think that's related to style as well. And obviously, interviewing also is a two-way process, whereby there is it's a candidate-led market. It's hard to find great people, and a big part of it is them interviewing you as well. And so obviously that becomes, so that it's one of the reasons why it tends to be more conversation as well, potentially. So okay, so you talked about intuition before. Have you given any thought to intuition in the sense of where it should play a role, where it shouldn't play a role? Like, what's your general view around intuition?
Yeah, I work quite a lot in the diversity space. I'm in the company's DEI board. So I have that conflict in my mind of intuition plus confirmation bias or unconscious bias that's going on, because quite often your intuition leads you to people that are very similar to yourself. And you go, oh, well, they're good because they do what I do. And that's something that I've been trying to combat as much as I can. So trying to really think of what it is that's important to the role rather than what it is that I do well myself. And actually, that's something that's led me to really look at the team and the balance in the team that I'm building, and trying to make sure that we do have diversity in many different ways, in cultural ways, but also in the ways that people think. Quite often in pre-sales, you get very obsessed with getting adaptable people, but you also do need some people in the team that maybe are a little bit more, if I say, this will sound insulting, but a bit more pedestrian in that style, because you need them to focus on maybe projects that are happening within the team that you want them to really sort of go through and be good completer finishers, for example. So yeah, there's a really, for me, it's a case of looking at the team and thinking about whether I've got a good spread, whether I need to rebalance it in some ways, and trying to factor that into the decisions I make when I hire for a team.
I think this is a super good point, trying to somehow have a very complete team, if that makes sense, with a lot of types of personality. And have you ever thought about, I don't know, two people that are different and you need both of them to be in your team, but at the same time, they might not get along? Like, what should a hiring manager do? Because it has diversity, but at the same time, they cannot build something together.
Yeah, I think if you build your team well, they will get on no matter how diverse they are. I think that you're right that there's often friction, but in some ways, friction can be good as long as it's seen as a positive learning experience where people work in different ways, and you start to say, well, that worked really well for this person, but you did something similar in that position and in that role. You can see why that wouldn't be so good for you, and get them to understand why people are effective in different ways. I also think as well, because we work with the AEs, that you can actually have a bit of friction with your AE naturally, and then you all club together within the pre-sales world to kind of complain about how bad the AEs are doing. that bonding naturally seems to happen in a team, because you've got a badly used word here, but you've got a common enemy or a common group that you're kind of able to criticize. I've worked with people in the past that have been very different to me in teams, and you have moments where you look at them and you go, I don't understand why you do it that way. And then later you reflect on it and go, okay, I can see why that works for you. I can take an element of that into what I do, but not change the good things that I do already. So yeah, you're right. It's a challenge. And I think as a manager, the key thing is just being very aware and making sure that you know that this could lead to conflicts, that you're open with your team about the fact that you've got very different people working in it.
This makes perfect sense, and it seems like you need a type of maturity to be able to integrate different perspectives and actually begin to see how that person acts and why he or she acts that way. So if you could go back and talk to yourself, do you have any advice that you'd give to your younger self when you started to hire?
Yeah, I think value humility. I think that's something that I've learned a lot, is that particularly in sales and pre-sales, you tend to get drawn to very flashy people. You tend to get drawn to people who are naturally extroverts, particularly when you're looking at the demo. But actually, I've seen some really successful people who are just very quiet inside themselves, but they still demo very well. They do a great demo, but they do it in much less showy style than some others, and they're humble and they want to learn and they take feedback very well. They're very easy to people to work with. They really cement a team. I think if you can find somebody who's good at the job, who's like that, then you're more likely to get success than you are if you find somebody who's very extrovert, but has no humility. I think that those people tend to be disruptive to the team, and they tend to basically go out on their own path and cause problems in the long run.
Yeah. This isn't pre-sales, but my old boss used to say that we're looking for the right blend of confidence and humility. And that's kind of really stuck with me. And I think especially on the pre-sales side, because but to an extent, you're balance. You're there to gain trust, and you're kind of you're the balance in that respect. And so it's even more important for pre-sales. You can potentially get away with it a bit more on the sales side, as long as the directness and the driving things through is there. But that then needs to be balanced from pre-sales in terms of earning that trust. Okay, cool. So in terms of so one of the interesting things that the study's thrown up so far as preliminary results is that 69% of hiring managers are not satisfied with the level of interview training that they've had. 34% haven't received any whatsoever over their career.
Yeah.
So what do you think in that respect? Do you think that there could be more support generally, and obviously not your current company, but in general, there could be more support? Do you think that hiring managers could hire better with more support? And what would that look like?
Undoubtedly, I think that most managers will fall into the role to start off with, and there's very little in to be honest, managerial training in various companies that I've worked for generally has been very haphazard, very kind of hit and miss with what they actually train you on. And interview training, I can't think. I may have had very kind of light at some point, but to my knowledge, I can't think of any real proper training. And when we've just talked about at the beginning how important getting that hiring decision right is, it does seem a bit counterproductive and a bit crazy to do that. And I also know from working, I've been on quite a few sales people interview, that sales leaders sometimes can be terrible at interviews, can be really not their natural skill set. And again, so not just pre-sales, but in general, I think across organizations that there would be a definite benefit in helping people to learn how to interview better. And then also on the diversity side, I think it's critical. It comes up all the time, but there's very little actual structured help to build that into the interview process. So 100% I would agree with that. How that would look, that's tricky. I think again, one of the biggest challenges is trying to get through to some people who feel they know it all already. I think that when it comes to interviews, some people just believe that they don't need any training at all. So it's trying to find the right kind of structure to it that's going to resonate with lots of different managers. And I've sat through similar courses in the past where people have tried training people on their job, and you just see certain managers switch off completely. So the honest answer is I don't know. I don't know what would be the way to get this, but I think it would be a really useful thing to be able to train people to do better.
Yeah. And your point around kind of you need to be wanting to learn and open to it, I suppose that links back to the humility. But I think also one of the reasons and one of the other hypotheses we've got starting off this study is that quality of hire isn't measured in a kind of in a tangible way generally at organizations, and so that takes away a level of accountability. There is obviously there's subjective kind of accountability in terms of this hire work, this hire doesn't work, but it gets muddied very quickly with lots of other variables and so on. And so I think that if there was more measurement of quality of hire, and I know you can't reduce everything down to a number, but I think that kind of accountability will drive awareness and desire to improve as well.
I would agree with that. I think the challenge often as well is that you see people making the same mistake again and again in the hiring process, that they'll hire somebody and they'll get rid of them within 6 months, during the probation, and
it definitely wasn't their fault.
Absolutely. Nobody could have foreseen that happening. I mean, it was completely out of the blue. But then they'll hire somebody else and you'll go, is that just not a clone of the person you just got rid of?
Yeah.
And you occasionally, if there was a big obvious mistake, then they'll go, okay, make sure we don't get somebody with that big obvious mistake, but they'll miss the other sort of 10 minor mistakes that they made in the previous hire. So if you can put some metrics and some guidance around it and help them to understand where they went wrong, definitely, and make them accountable.
And if if we're thinking about that ideal candidate, what is your perspective on soft skills versus technical skills versus cultural fit? If you could imagine a pie chart, how would that be split?
So I think the soft skills is probably the biggest piece of the pie for me. I think technical skills are probably the lowest. I think that technical skills, if you have the soft skills, you can fake the technical skills in some ways. I think that you can. I've worked with people that don't have technical brains but have a really good way of presenting, and a really great way of being able to kind of pass the technical pieces onto other people where needs be, and that rapport building side that we talked about, I think is so critical in the role, that you can excuse them being kind of weaker in those technical areas. Cultural fit, that's a bit of a triggering one for me, because I quite often will try and hire somebody that I see as a cultural fit, and then I realize that I'm actually going into my own biases, that sometimes I'm picking people as a cultural fit because they're very similar to me, or I feel like they'll fit into the team. But actually, where I can, I now try and think, well, can I bring somebody in who potentially can challenge the team in a way that's not going to break them, but actually will bring a different perspective and a different way of working to it. So cultural fit, I've now tried to minimize that as much as I can, which means soft skills have got a very, very big piece of the Venn diagram now, I'd say.
That's great. It's really good to hear you being so thoughtful in terms of that kind of that self-awareness is there, in terms of, because I think that's without that, it's impossible for there to be improvement. So cool. And then, so as a final question, do you have any further ideas, thoughts around the interview process, around hiring in general, that you don't think that we've touched on? It's a big, broad, open question that you think's worthy of discussion or worthy of comment.
Yeah, I think one thing that you see done a lot in the non-technical spaces, in a kind of more everyday kind of working, is you see group interviews happening. And I in some ways, I'm a bit surprised with a role that we say is so much about rapport building and about connecting with people, that we don't do more of that kind of thing in the pre-sales world. I mean, if you threw 5 candidates together and got them to work on a project or on a process together, and then got them all to present part of it to you.
You mean group interviews of groups of candidates together?
Yeah, groups of candidates.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And I guess you've got the issue of, then people know who's going for the role. But for me, that's something. I mean, I have seen people use bringing in lots of people from the business to interview this candidate, but that for me doesn't work in the same way, because it's almost everybody in the business is one way of looking of thinking and being, and then you've got the poor candidate on their own. I almost feel if they were with a group of people in the same boat as them, that you might see them just being able to be a bit more themselves in that process. But practically, that's probably not going to be the easiest thing to organize.
Well, it's funny because things go in and out of fashion. And in the old days, I don't know if you remember the concept of the assessment center. I think it still happens at kind of senior exec level. And obviously those were times when groups of candidates were brought together. And it definitely happens in terms of like graduate hiring for like pre-sales academies and sales academies and that sort of thing. So if it works there, it should work elsewhere. And I suppose it's like the trade-off between practically how easy is it versus the benefit. But it seems to me that you've got something there for sure.
Bruce, thank you so much for your time and all the insights that you shared with us. We are going to share the report with you, and we are looking forward to connecting with you again.
Absolutely. If you have any other questions, I think you'll probably tell I really enjoy talking about things like this. So if there's any other questions you have or any other projects that I can be helpful on, just reach out. I'll be very happy to help.
Super. Thank you so much again.
No problem. Amazing. Thanks so much, Bruce. It's been a real pleasure and really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Really great to meet you too. Have a great rest of your week.
Cheers.
Yes.